The story of Gideon. He defeated the Midianite army with only 300 soldiers. Bible stories. Can you imagine defeating an army of over 1,000,000 soldiers with just 300 men? This isn't a Hollywood movie script. This is the extraordinary true story of Gideon, one of the most remarkable military victories in biblical history. What makes this story so unique is not just the astronomical odds of 300 versus 1,000,000. It's about how an ordinary man hiding in fear transformed into one of history's most inspiring leaders through an incredible journey of faith, strategy, and divine intervention. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by challenges that seemed impossible to overcome? Have you questioned whether you have what it takes to face life's biggest battles? In ancient Israel, during one of the darkest periods of their history, the Israelites faced devastating oppression from the Midianites. Their crops were destroyed, their livestock stolen, and their people driven into hiding in caves and mountains. The situation seemed hopeless. But why would God choose Gideon, the youngest son from the weakest clan, to lead this seemingly impossible mission? How could someone who was found hiding in a wine press become the deliverer of an entire nation? And most intriguingly, why would God deliberately reduce an army of 3,200 to just 300 men when facing such overwhelming odds? In this video, you'll discover not just a historical account, but timeless principles about leadership, courage, and overcoming self-doubt. You'll learn how God can use ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things, and how apparent weaknesses can become sources of unprecedented strength. Whether you're facing personal challenges, professional obstacles, or spiritual battles, Gideon's story holds powerful lessons that are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. If you've ever felt like you're facing impossible odds in your life, type warrior in the comments below. Let's build a community of modern-day Gideons who understand that with faith, even the most daunting challenges can be overcome. Part 1. The Calling of an Unlikely Hero. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be chosen for greatness when you feel utterly inadequate? What would you do if divine destiny knocked on your door while you were hiding in fear? How does an ordinary person transform into a legendary leader? In the time of the Judges, around 1200 BCE, Israel faced one of its darkest periods. The Midianites, along with their allies, had turned the Promised Land into a wasteland. Picture this. Every harvest season, these raiders would sweep across the countryside like locusts, destroying crops, stealing livestock, and leaving devastation in their wake. The once prosperous Israelites were forced to hide in mountain caves and strongholds, their spirits as crushed as their harvested grain. It was in this atmosphere of desperation that we find our unlikely hero. Gideon, the youngest son of Joash from the clan of Abiezer, was threshing wheat in a winepress, an unusual and telling detail. Normally, wheat would be threshed on an open threshing floor where the wind could carry away the chaff. But here was Gideon, crouched in a winepress, trying to hide his family's meager harvest from the Midianite raiders. This simple scene paints a powerful picture of the fear that gripped the nation. But destiny had other plans. The biblical text tells us that the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Imagine the scene. a divine messenger addressing a man hiding in a hole as a mighty warrior. The irony couldn't have been more striking. Yet this moment would mark the beginning of an extraordinary transformation. Gideon's response reveals the raw honesty of a man grappling with doubt and disappointment. "Pardon me, my lord," he replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" His words echo the universal human cry in times of suffering. Where is God when we need him most? The divine response cuts through Gideon's excuses with surgical precision. "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Notice the emphasis not on Gideon's inadequacies, but on the authority of the sender. This is a crucial turning point in the narrative, where divine calling meets human inadequacy. But Gideon, like many of us, struggled to see beyond his limitations. "How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." His protest follows a pattern we see throughout biblical history. Moses claimed he couldn't speak well. Jeremiah said he was too young. Isaiah felt too sinful. Yet God's response remains consistent. "I will be with you." To confirm this extraordinary calling, Gideon requested a sign. He prepared an offering, a young goat and unleavened bread, and placed it on a rock. The angel touched the offering with his staff, and fire sprang from the rock, consuming everything. This supernatural confirmation left Gideon both terrified and transformed. He built an altar there and named it "The Lord is Peace," a profound declaration from a man who had been hiding in fear moments before. This initial encounter set the stage for Gideon's first act of courage, destroying his father's altar to Baal. Under cover of darkness, with just 10 servants, he tore down the pagan shrine and built an altar to the Lord in its place. This act of defiance against the prevailing idolatry marked his first step from fearful farmer to faithful warrior. The transformation of Gideon reminds us that greatness often begins in the most unlikely places. His story challenges our assumptions about what makes a leader. It wasn't his strength, his status, or his confidence that qualified him. It was his willingness to step forward despite his fears when called by God. But Gideon's journey from reluctant recruit to confident commander was just beginning. His faith would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined, as God prepared him for one of the most extraordinary military victories in history. Part 2. Building Faith Through Signs. Have you ever asked God for a sign to confirm your path? What would you do if you were called to lead an army against overwhelming odds? How far would you go to ensure you weren't making a catastrophic mistake? In the quiet fields of ancient Israel, under the spreading branches of an oak tree in Ophrah, Gideon wrestled with these very questions. The weight of divine calling pressed heavily upon his shoulders, a calling that would determine the fate of an entire nation. But before he could lead others, he needed to strengthen his own faith. The biblical account in Judges 6:36-40 provides us with an intimate glimpse into this crucial moment. Picture the scene. The evening air growing cool, the sun casting long shadows across the threshing floor, and Gideon, still uncertain despite his earlier encounters with the divine, preparing for what would become one of the most famous tests of faith in biblical history. "Lord," Gideon whispered, his voice trembling with both hope and fear. "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised." He paused, gathering his courage. What he was about to propose was bold, perhaps even presumptuous, but the stakes were too high for uncertainty. The lives of thousands would depend on his leadership. So he laid out a fleece, a wool pelt on the threshing floor. The request was specific and seemingly impossible. "If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand as you said." This wasn't just a simple request for guidance. It was a plea for supernatural intervention that would defy natural law. The historical context makes this test even more remarkable. In ancient Near Eastern culture, dew was considered a divine blessing, often associated with fertility and abundance. The threshing floor itself was a sacred space, where the separation of wheat from chaff symbolized divine judgment. Gideon chose this location deliberately, combining powerful cultural symbols with his personal need for certainty. The next morning, the results were undeniable. The fleece was so saturated that Gideon could wring out a bowl full of water, while the ground around it remained completely dry. Yet, in a moment that reveals the depths of human doubt and the patience of divine grace, Gideon made another request, this time asking for the opposite sign: the fleece to remain dry while the ground around it was wet with dew. Some might view this as a lack of faith, but it reveals something profound about the nature of divine guidance. God, understanding the enormous responsibility placed on Gideon's shoulders, accommodated his need for absolute certainty. The next morning, just as requested, the fleece was dry while dew covered the ground, a second miraculous confirmation that defied natural explanation. This double confirmation served multiple purposes. First, it eliminated any possibility of coincidence. Second, it demonstrated God's willingness to meet us in our uncertainty with patience and understanding. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it transformed Gideon's faith from theoretical belief to experiential certainty. The significance of these signs extends beyond their immediate context. Throughout biblical history, we see other instances where God provided tangible confirmations of His will: Moses and the burning bush, Elijah and the fire from heaven, the apostles and Pentecost. Each sign served not just to confirm divine will, but to transform the faith of those who witnessed them. For Gideon, these signs marked a crucial turning point. The man who had been hiding in a winepress, the youngest son from the weakest clan, was now ready to step into his role as Israel's deliverer. His faith, strengthened through these supernatural confirmations, would soon be tested in ways he could never have imagined. But just as Gideon's faith was growing stronger, God was about to challenge every military convention and strategic principle he had ever known. The army that gathered around him would face a divine downsizing that would shake the foundations of human logic. Part 3. The Divine Strategy. What goes through a leader's mind when they're told to send 97% of their army home? How does one process divine wisdom that seems to defy all military logic? And what happens when conventional strategy gives way to supernatural intervention? In the sun-scorched valleys of ancient Israel, Gideon stood before his assembled army of 3,2,000 men. The air was thick with anticipation as these warriors prepared to face the Midianite forces, a vast army that the Bible describes as numerous as locusts, with camels as countless as the sand on the seashore. By any military standard, even 3,2,000 men seemed insufficient against such overwhelming odds. But God had different plans. The Lord spoke to Gideon with words that must have struck him like a thunderbolt. "You have too many men." This divine declaration challenged everything Gideon had learned about warfare. In the ancient Near East, as documented in numerous biblical and historical accounts, military victory often depended on numerical superiority. The Assyrians, Egyptians, and other great powers of the time built their empires on the strength of massive armies. Yet here was God directing Gideon to reduce his forces. The first reduction came through a remarkable test. "Announce to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." Imagine the scene as 2,2,000 men, more than 2/3 of the army, turned and walked away. The remaining 1,000 soldiers must have watched in disbelief as their ranks thinned dramatically. But God wasn't finished. "There are still too many men," he declared. What followed was one of the most unusual military selection processes in history. The Lord instructed Gideon to take his men to the water and observe how they drank. Those who lapped the water like dogs, remaining vigilant and ready, would be separated from those who knelt down to drink. Only 300 men lapped the water, bringing Gideon's army to a mere fraction of its original size. This selection process wasn't arbitrary. In ancient warfare, situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. The 300 who lapped the water demonstrated both efficiency and vigilance, qualities essential for the unconventional battle ahead. These men showed they could remain alert even while meeting basic needs, a characteristic that would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. The biblical narrative provides fascinating context for this divine strategy. Throughout Israel's history, God repeatedly demonstrated his power through seemingly impossible situations. Remember Moses facing the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army in pursuit, or Joshua's unlikely victory at Jericho. These precedents would have been known to Gideon and his men, yet faith in such moments required extraordinary courage. What makes this reduction even more remarkable is its stated purpose. God explained to Gideon, "In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her." This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about demonstrating a fundamental spiritual truth, that victory comes not through human might but through divine power. Consider the psychological impact on the 300 chosen men. They knew they were drastically outnumbered. They had watched thousands of their comrades leave, yet they remained, chosen for a divine mission that defied human logic. Their selection wasn't based on physical strength, military experience, or social status, but on a simple action that revealed their character. The reduction of Gideon's army stands as one of history's most dramatic examples of how God's wisdom often contradicts human reasoning. It challenges our natural inclination to rely on visible resources and conventional strategies. In a world that celebrates bigger, stronger, and more, this account presents a radical alternative: the power of less when guided by divine purpose. As Gideon's tiny army prepared for battle, They would need one final assurance, a divine confirmation that would transform their fear into unshakable confidence. What happened next would demonstrate that in God's economy, sometimes the smallest force can have the greatest impact. This pivotal moment in Gideon's story reminds us that true strength isn't always found in numbers or conventional wisdom. Sometimes the most powerful position is one of apparent weakness, where divine strength can be most clearly displayed. Part 4. The Night Before Battle. Have you ever wondered what goes through a leader's mind the night before a decisive battle? What sustains courage when facing overwhelming odds? And how does divine guidance manifest in moments of extreme pressure? The night before Gideon's legendary battle against the Midianites presents one of the most captivating episodes in biblical military history. Picture the scene. The vast Midianite army, described in Judges 7:12 as thick as locusts, sprawled across the valley below. Their countless camels and tents stretched to the horizon, their campfires dotting the landscape like stars fallen to earth. Above them, on the slopes of Mount Gilead, Gideon and his mere 300 men waited in tense anticipation. Despite the divine confirmation that had led to this moment, we can imagine the weight of responsibility pressing upon Gideon's shoulders. The lives of his men, the fate of his people, and the validation of his calling all hung in the balance. It was at this crucial moment that God, understanding the human need for final reassurance, offered Gideon an extraordinary opportunity. "If you are afraid to attack," God said to Gideon, "go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying." This divine suggestion reveals God's deep understanding of human nature. Even chosen leaders need encouragement in moments of doubt. The timing was perfect. Under cover of darkness, Gideon and his servant could approach the enemy camp. As they crept closer to the Midianite encampment, the sounds of the massive army grew more distinct. The murmur of conversations, the nickering of horses, the clinking of weapons. The risk was enormous. Discovery would mean certain death. Yet God had promised this reconnaissance would strengthen Gideon's resolve. Then, in what can only be described as divine orchestration, Gideon and Purah arrived at the exact moment to overhear a conversation that would change everything. A Midianite soldier was telling his companion about a dream. "I had a dream," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed." The interpretation his friend provided was immediate and striking. "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands." The symbolism was profound. Barley bread was considered the food of the poor, yet in the dream it had the power to overthrow the mighty. Just as Gideon's small force would soon overturn the vast Midianite army. For Gideon, this overheard conversation was more than coincidence. It was divine confirmation. The text tells us that upon hearing this, he bowed in worship, a powerful testimony to his growing faith. The transformation was complete. From the fearful man hiding in a winepress to thresh wheat, he had become a leader ready to execute one of the most daring military strategies in history. This nighttime reconnaissance mission serves multiple purposes in the narrative. First, it demonstrates God's understanding of human psychology, providing tangible encouragement when needed most. Second, it shows divine sovereignty over events, orchestrating even the dreams and conversations of enemies to achieve his purposes. Finally, it reveals the growth in Gideon's character, his willingness to act on faith while accepting additional confirmation when offered. The psychological impact of this experience cannot be overstated. Gideon returned to his 300 men with renewed confidence, now certain that victory was not just possible, but assured. His words to his men carried the weight of conviction. "Get up. The Lord has given the Midianite camp into your hands." As the night deepened and Gideon began dividing his men into 3 companies, each soldier was given unusual weapons, a trumpet in one hand, an empty jar with a torch inside in the other. The stage was set for one of the most unconventional military strategies ever recorded. But what gave Gideon the confidence to proceed with such an unorthodox plan? The answer lay in what he had witnessed in the enemy camp. God was already working to defeat the Midianites through unexpected means. As the first hints of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Gideon's 300 men took their positions surrounding the Midianite camp. The unusual weapons they carried would soon create a chaos that would echo through military history. Part 5. The Battle and Victory. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to face an army of over 1,000,000 with just 300 men? What goes through your mind when you're completely outnumbered yet victory depends entirely on your next move? How did Gideon transform from a fearful man hiding in a winepress to leading one of history's most extraordinary military victories? As night fell over the hills of ancient Israel, Gideon and his small band of 300 warriors stood at the edge of their camp, overlooking the vast Midianite army spread across the valley below. The book of Judges tells us that the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples had settled in the valley thick as locusts, with camels as numerous as the sand on the seashore, Judges 7:12. The contrast was stark. 300 men against a force so vast it seemed to cover the entire landscape. But Gideon wasn't leading an ordinary military operation. Following divine instruction, each of his men carried an unusual set of weapons. A trumpet in one hand and a large clay jar containing a torch in the other. No swords, no spears, no conventional weapons of war. The strategy seemed counterintuitive, perhaps even foolish by military standards, yet this was God's precise plan. Dividing his small force into 3 companies of 100 men each, Gideon positioned them strategically around the enemy camp. The timing was crucial. They waited until the middle watch, just after the changing of the guard, when the enemy would be at their most vulnerable. The valley lay quiet under the blanket of darkness, with only the occasional flicker of enemy campfires breaking the night's stillness. Then, at Gideon's signal, the silence was shattered. "When I and all who are with me blow our trumpets," he had instructed, "then from all around the camp blow yours and shout for the Lord and for Gideon." Judges 7:18. The execution was perfect. 300 trumpets suddenly blasted through the night air, their sound amplified by the valley walls. Simultaneously, the warriors smashed their clay jars, revealing 300 blazing torches that seemed to ignite the darkness. The psychological impact was devastating. Imagine being a Midianite soldier, jolted awake by the thunderous sound of hundreds of trumpets, only to see flames appearing to surround your entire camp. The battle cry, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon," echoed from all directions, creating the illusion of a massive army launching a coordinated attack. What happened next was extraordinary. Scripture records that, while each man held his position around the camp, all the Midianites ran, crying out as they fled. Judges 7:21. In the ensuing panic and confusion, the Lord caused the Midianites to turn on each other with their swords. The massive army dissolved into chaos, with soldiers unable to distinguish friend from foe in the darkness. The victory was total and decisive. The Midianite army fled toward Beth-shittah, with Gideon's men in pursuit. The remaining Israelite tribes were called out to join the chase, capturing and defeating the enemy leaders. Historical records indicate that 200 enemy swordsmen fell that day, Judges 8:10, marking one of the most lopsided victories in military history. This battle demonstrates a profound truth. Sometimes our greatest victories come not through conventional strength or superior numbers, but through divine strategy and perfect obedience. Gideon's victory wasn't just about military tactics. It was about trust in divine guidance, even when it seemed to defy human logic. As we transition to the aftermath of this remarkable victory, we'll see how Gideon faced perhaps an even greater challenge, managing success and maintaining unity among the tribes of Israel. Because sometimes the real test of leadership comes not in the heat of battle, but in the moments of triumph that follow. The story of this battle has become a timeless example of how faith, strategy, and divine intervention can overcome seemingly impossible odds. It reminds us that victory often depends not on the size of our resources, but on our willingness to trust and follow divine guidance, even when it challenges our conventional wisdom. But as the dust of battle settled and the initial euphoria of victory began to fade, Gideon would face new challenges that would test his leadership in ways the battle never did. Part 6: Leadership Challenges and Legacy. What happens when victory brings unexpected challenges? How does a military triumph transform into a test of leadership and wisdom? And what can we learn from how Gideon handled the complex aftermath of his miraculous victory? The dust had barely settled on the battlefield when Gideon faced his first major leadership crisis. The tribe of Ephraim, one of the most powerful and proud tribes in Israel, approached him with sharp criticism. Their complaint? They felt overlooked and disrespected for not being called to participate in the initial battle against the Midianites. In those days, tribal honor and participation in significant victories were matters of tremendous importance, often leading to bitter rivalries and even civil wars. This moment was crucial. Standing before the angry Ephraimites, Gideon could have responded with pride or defensiveness. After all, he had just led 300 men to an unprecedented victory. Instead, he demonstrated remarkable diplomatic wisdom. "What have I accomplished compared to you?" he asked them. "Aren't the gleanings of Ephraim better than the full grape harvest of Abiezer?" By comparing their later contribution, capturing the Midianite princes Oreb and Zeb, to the best harvest of his own clan, Gideon masterfully diffused their anger through humility and acknowledgement. But the challenges weren't over. As Gideon and his exhausted 300 men pursued the remaining Midianite kings, Zebah and Zalmunna, they came to the town of Sukkoth. Picture this scene. Warriors who had fought through the night, tired and hungry, requesting basic provisions from their own countrymen. Yet the leaders of Sukkoth responded with skepticism and mockery. Are Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army? Their response revealed a deeper issue within Israel, the lack of unity and faith in God's chosen leader. The people of Penuel, another Israelite city, showed the same dismissive attitude. These cities, calculating their political interests, feared potential retaliation from the Midianite kings if Gideon failed. Their short-sightedness and lack of solidarity would have serious consequences. After capturing the Midianite kings, Gideon returned to settle accounts with these cities. At Sukkoth, he taught the men of the city a lesson using desert thorns and briars, while at Penuel he demolished their tower, the symbol of their pride and security. These actions, though severe by modern standards, establish crucial principles about leadership, accountability, and national unity in ancient Israel. The narrative reaches its climax when Gideon confronts Zebah and Zalmunna. These kings had killed his brothers at Mount Tabor, making this confrontation deeply personal. When they proudly declared that his brothers looked like sons of a king, Gideon responded with a solemn oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, if you had spared them, I would not kill you." This moment reveals how Gideon balanced justice with his role as a national leader. Perhaps the most profound test of Gideon's leadership came after the victory, when the Israelites offered to make him king. "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian." This was a pivotal moment in Israel's history, foreshadowing their eventual desire for a monarchy. Gideon's response was remarkable. "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." This decision reflected deep theological understanding and personal humility. Unlike many leaders who grasp at power, Gideon recognized that Israel's true king was God alone. However, his later actions revealed human complexity. He created a golden ephod that unfortunately became an object of inappropriate worship, showing how even the wisest leaders can make decisions with unintended consequences. The story of Gideon's leadership challenges teaches us timeless principles about handling success, managing internal conflicts, and maintaining spiritual integrity. His ability to balance justice with diplomacy, strength with humility, and personal vengeance with national interests provides a masterclass in leadership. While Gideon's military victory was extraordinary, perhaps his greatest legacy lies in how he handled the complex challenges that came with success. His story reminds us that true leadership isn't just about winning battles, but about managing the peace that follows. Conclusion: timeless lessons for today. As we conclude the remarkable story of Gideon, we find ourselves face to face with timeless truths that transcend the ancient battlefields of Israel. This narrative isn't just a historical account. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles, doubts, and potential for extraordinary achievement. Consider how Gideon's journey parallels our modern challenges. Like him, we often find ourselves facing seemingly impossible odds. Perhaps you're confronting challenges at work that appear overwhelming or personal battles that seem beyond your strength. Gideon's transformation from a fearful man hiding in a winepress to a confident leader reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite it. The reduction of Gideon's army teaches us a profound truth about success. Sometimes our greatest breakthroughs come when we have the least resources. In today's world of bigger is better thinking, this story challenges us to consider that perhaps our limitations aren't obstacles, but opportunities for divine intervention. When was the last time you saw your inadequacies as potential platforms for extraordinary achievement? But perhaps the most powerful lesson lies in Gideon's leadership after victory. His handling of internal conflicts, his balance of justice with diplomacy, and his refusal to establish a dynasty demonstrate that true leadership isn't about wielding power. It's about serving with wisdom and humility. In our era of strong personalities and power politics, these principles remain remarkably relevant. What battles are you facing today? What winepress are you hiding in? Gideon's story invites us to step out of our comfort zones and into our calling, knowing that our inadequacies don't disqualify us. They might be exactly what qualifies us for our unique mission. If this story has resonated with you, I invite you to share your own Gideon moment in the comments below. When have you faced overwhelming odds and found strength you didn't know you had? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you're in the midst of your own battle right now, remember, the same power that transformed Gideon from the least to a leader is still at work today. Sometimes our greatest victories come disguised as impossible challenges. Before you leave, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring biblical narratives that offer practical wisdom for today's challenges. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss our upcoming stories about other unlikely heroes who changed history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the Bible's most inspiring stories. Remember, it's not about the size of your army, it's about the size of your faith. See you in our next video, where we'll explore another fascinating story from the greatest book ever written.